Thrilled to be invited to the upcoming state occasion. Proper proud moment. The King's been brilliant. After the investigation wrapped, though, they quietly stripped Meghan of the Duchess title.
No one saw it coming, especially not from him. In a move that sent shockwaves through both royal and celebrity circles, David Beckham, once a football icon and now a global statesman, released a statement that rattled the monarchy. With calm conviction, he claimed that King Charles had already and quietly removed Meghan Markle's Duchess title, a decision allegedly kept hidden from the public until now. The revelation cracked open a vault of secrets the palace had fought desperately to contain. This was not just another headline or a passing royal rumor drifting through tabloid air. It sounded like something far more serious, emerging from the silent corridors where royal decisions are made and consequences are designed to last for generations. What made the moment even more unsettling was Beckham's delivery. He didn't raise his voice or show emotion he didn't need to. His words felt measured and deliberate, as though he knew exactly what he was doing and precisely what would happen once the public heard King Charles's name and the removal of Meghan's title spoken in the same breath. Instantly, it felt as though the palace walls shook, not with anger, but with panic, the kind of panic that erupts only when something long buried is dragged into the light. The most shocking part wasn't the claim itself, but who made it. David Beckham is not a random commentator chasing relevance or a gossip columnist seeking attention. He is someone who has spent years building trust at the highest levels, making his words impossible to dismiss, is a man welcomed into the highest circles of British society, invited into rooms most people will never even know exist. When he speaks, it doesn't sound like speculation, it sounds like confirmation. Within minutes of his statement, the media went feral. Newsrooms moved like emergency units, editors scrambled for verification, producers rewrote entire segments on the fly, and royal correspondents suddenly sounded nervous rather than confident. Across social media, reactions didn't simmer, they exploded. Some called it justice, arguing Meghan had crossed too many lines, while others called it cruel, insisting the royal family was orchestrating yet another public humiliation. Regardless of where opinions landed, one truth was undeniable. This single leak reopened the rawest wound in the monarchy's modern history. Harry and Meghan's departure from the firm was never just a family dispute, it was a public divorce from tradition itself. Now, fueled by Beckham's words, it felt as though the monarchy had made its most ruthless move, yet one not aimed at reconciliation, but at erasure. The question was no longer whether they might ever be welcomed back, but whether they were being written out entirely. Behind the headlines, the outrage, and the frantic denials that rang hollow, there was an unsettling sense that the palace had been preparing for this moment all along. Nothing in royal life happens by accident, not a title, not its removal, and certainly not a leak. When Beckham delivered that line, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a signal that something far bigger was coming, something locked away for months, perhaps longer, and something Meghan never expected would be turned against her. That raised an even deeper mystery. How did a world-famous footballer come to possess such a closely guarded secret, and why reveal it now? The palace has always thrived on silence until the silence breaks. Sources whisper of a sealed royal decree issued months ago, quietly stripping Meghan of her Duchess of Sussex title under strict confidentiality. Hidden deep within the royal archives, the document was reportedly signed only by King Charles and 2 aides and was never meant for public eyes. Yet someone leaked it, allowing that buried decision to rise like a ghost from beneath the palace floorboards. What makes this more than a routine administrative act is the deliberate secrecy surrounding it. The decision was never announced, never processed through the usual ceremonial routes. Instead, it was locked away within private royal channels, sealed with authority and cloaked in silence. Only a handful of insiders even knew it existed, most sworn to absolute discretion, raising the inevitable question of who broke that vow. According to insiders, the move was not driven by scandal or revenge. It wasn't about punishing Meghan for interviews, books, or even the Netflix series. This, they say, was colder and more calculated. King Charles reportedly framed it as a constitutional realignment, a decision intended to preserve the structure of the monarchy itself rather than address personal grievances, suggesting a strategic shift with consequences far beyond any single individual. King Charles, by all accounts, wanted clarity, definition, and firm boundaries, not emotion. In his view, that meant making the separation from Harry and Meghan complete, both symbolically and legally. Yet not everyone inside the palace agreed. The moment the decree was drafted, tensions flared among senior courtiers. Some warned that such a move would only deepen the rift, while others applauded it as long overdue. A few even cautioned that quietly removing the title without public explanation could backfire catastrophically if it ever came to light. Charles, however, remained resolute. He didn't want drama, he wanted distance, believing discretion would serve everyone best. That may explain why Meghan and Harry were allegedly never formally informed when the decree was signed. The palace calculated that slowly and quietly removing the Duchess label from royal documents and press references would allow the public to adjust without outrage until that plan unraveled the moment David Beckham spoke. Just days before the leak reached the world, Beckham had attended a private dinner with King Charles at Clarence House, a discreet gathering with no press, no publicity, and only a handful of guests. One of them, it seems, left with more than polite conversation. Beckham's long-standing relationship with the monarchy, particularly with Prince William, granted him rare access, but no one expected him to become the messenger for one of the most controversial royal decisions in years. Some believe he was never meant to say anything. Others suggest he was subtly encouraged to let the truth slip a trial balloon, a controlled detonation. Either way, the moment he spoke, the palace was forced into a corner. The royal press office, which had been quietly phasing out references to Meghan as Duchess, plunged into chaos as editors called, journalists pressed, and the question shifted from whether the title was removed to why no one had been told. With the quiet strategy in ruins, the hidden decree became public ammunition, and behind the scenes the monarchy scrambled to regain control of the narrative. What had seemed like a story about titles was rapidly becoming something far deeper, a story of betrayal, shifting alliances, and silence breaking under the weight of long-held secrets. At the center of it all lay a tangled history between two families, one royal and one celebrity, whose relationship had been quietly fracturing for years. Once celebrated as glamorous couples standing side by side, admiration had gradually curdled into distrust, and private frost had hardened into a public freeze. Insiders claim that Meghan and Victoria Beckham's friendship collapsed amid whispers of betrayal, something David reportedly took personally, widening the rift and reshaping lines of palace loyalty. That raises an uncomfortable question. Was this leak David's quiet revenge? Back in 2018, when the world was still enchanted by the fairy tale image of Meghan Markle marrying into the royal family, the Beckhams were front-row witnesses. David and Victoria were invited to the wedding, a highly visible show of favor. Meghan was then establishing herself as a modern, refreshing duchess, and Victoria appeared a natural ally, stylish, influential, and firmly embedded in Britain's elite, making the eventual breakdown of that relationship all the more striking. For a brief moment, the optics were flawless, with Victoria Beckham standing as fashion royalty beside Meghan, the modern duchess. But behind the curtain, the relationship was already beginning to fray. Rumors soon emerged that Meghan had accused Victoria of leaking private style details to the press, an allegation Victoria strongly denied. What was initially dismissed as tabloid gossip gradually gained traction within elite circles. Hurt by the implication and offended by what she saw as a lack of trust, Victoria quietly pulled away, while Meghan found herself increasingly isolated from the Beckhams' inner circle. Over time, the fracture widened. Invitations that once flowed easily began to dry up, joint fashion initiatives were abandoned, and charity events once expected to feature both couples were quietly reshaped. The silence between the two women deepened, hardening into something far colder than distance. As Meghan and Victoria's relationship unraveled behind the scenes, David Beckham's closeness to the monarchy only strengthened. Already favored by Prince William through shared charitable work and sporting ties, David began forging more direct connections with King Charles. Within royal circles, he was respected not merely as a public figure, but as someone who understood loyalty, duty, and restraint, qualities the institution valued deeply. Insiders say David was particularly troubled by Harry and Meghan's public attacks on the monarchy. To him, it was less about disagreement and more about disrespect. He believed the monarchy, like the nation it represents, had flaws but deserved dignity, and seeing Meghan undermine it while still holding on to a royal title struck a nerve he could not ignore. When the moment came to speak, whether planned or spontaneous, David did not hesitate. His words may have sounded calm and controlled, but the motivation behind them ran deep. This was not gossip or idle commentary. It was a man defending what he viewed as the sanctity of an institution that had welcomed him, supported him, and elevated his post-football legacy. In royal circles, many now believe his revelation was anything but accidental. Some see it as a calculated line drawn in public, a clear signal of where his loyalty lay. By confirming that Meghan's title had been removed, he aligned himself fully with the monarchy's unspoken code, positioning himself as more than a friend of the crown, perhaps even a quiet enforcer of its values, where loyalty stands above all else. As the public fixated on the bombshell he dropped, a deeper story emerged. This was never just about Meghan's title. It was about fractures long forming beneath the surface, old alliances crumbling, and new allegiances taking root in silence. Behind the polished smiles and carefully managed appearances, the feud between the Beckhams and the Sussexes had grown into something far more entrenched, signaling a shift in power, loyalty, and influence that extended well beyond a single royal designation. What unfolded was no longer just a personal dispute, but a proxy war for something far greater: reputation, power, and control over the narrative of modern royalty. As tensions simmered beneath the surface, King Charles faced a decision that went far beyond titles. Though long known for tolerance, his patience was not limitless. In recent months, palace insiders say he grew increasingly disillusioned by Meghan's continued public critiques of the institution. It wasn't a single incident that pushed him to act, but a slow accumulation of perceived disloyalties. From the beginning of his reign, Charles had hoped to set a new tone, one of unity, reform, and grace under scrutiny. Even after Harry and Meghan's dramatic exit, he held back, believing the family could still be mended and that the crown would endure if given space. Instead, that space only widened the divide, and with every interview and carefully phrased jab, Charles felt disappointment deepen behind his public smiles. Others within the family lost patience far sooner. Insiders say Princess Anne, characteristically direct, warned Charles in a closed-door meeting that the Sussexes had left the family but not the spotlight, and that the crown was paying the price. Prince Edward reportedly echoed her concerns, noting that silence should not be mistaken for forgiveness. Still, Charles hesitated until a private letter surfaced. Quietly delivered but explosive in content, it was allegedly written by Meghan and sent not to the palace, but to a foreign journalist at an overseas outlet known for its anti-monarchist stance. In the letter, she reportedly accused the institution itself of fostering exclusion, silencing truth, and engaging in what she called cultural sabotage at the highest level. For Charles, the pain was not simply in the accusations, but in the decision to take the conflict beyond the family and beyond Britain, effectively globalizing it. That, to a king who had spent a lifetime balancing tradition with diplomacy, crossed a line. Meeting was convened, and the outcome was swift. Meghan's title would be formally but quietly removed. Even then, resistance followed. When informed through intermediaries, Meghan reportedly refused to accept a private demotion, insisting that if the palace intended to revoke her honors, it should do so publicly and accept the fallout. The standoff was brief. The crown did not negotiate. On the final page of the decree, Charles is said to have added a handwritten note of just 6 words, "With regret, but necessity for the crown." It marked the end of an era not only for Meghan, but for Charles himself. A monarch who once believed reconciliation was always possible had now embraced the politics of removal, fully aware of the symbolic weight of his action. Stripping a royal title is no minor edit. It is an excommunication in ceremonial language, a declaration louder than any press release. Yet even as the ink dried, another storm was forming across the Atlantic. When the leak erupted into headlines, Prince Harry was reportedly blindsided. Palace aides claim he made a furious late-night call to his father, one that quickly escalated into a shouting match. "You didn't even tell me," he allegedly yelled. Charles, however, stood firm, replying simply, "You made your choice." In that moment, a fragile father-son truce shattered once more. One insider later described the call as the loudest silence ever heard between two blood relatives, coming just hours after Beckham's revelation went global, leaving Harry, already distanced from the institution he once served, facing a rupture that now felt final. Having already distanced himself from royal operations, Prince Harry believed that, despite everything, certain lines would never be crossed without warning. This, he assumed, was one of them, and he was wrong. What began as confusion quickly hardened into disbelief and then rage. Insiders say Harry's voice trembled not from fear, but from a deep sense of betrayal as he demanded answers. Why now, why Meghan, and why he had not been consulted. Yet what cut deepest was not the act itself, but the secrecy surrounding it. Once again, a major decision had been made inside the palace without so much as a courtesy call, not to a son, not to a brother, not even to a duke. Meghan, learning of the decision through online reports rather than formal channels, was reportedly devastated. Sources close to the Sussexes claim she broke down in tears, not over the loss of the title itself, but over the public humiliation of how it unfolded. To her, it wasn't about status, it was about erasure, about being punished for speaking her truth, and about being deliberately excluded in a way meant to wound. King Charles, however, did not waver. Calm, measured, and almost cold, he reportedly told Harry, "You left the institution. You chose your own path. This was inevitable." The words landed with finality, leaving no room for argument or negotiation. For Harry, this was more than the loss of a title, it was confirmation that the royal family had moved on without him and that reconciliation was no longer even a pretense. More painfully still, it signaled that his identity as a son, a prince, and an insider had collapsed into something unrecognizable. He was now outside the walls permanently. In desperation, Harry reached out to William not to argue or mediate, but simply to talk. The call went unanswered. Palace insiders suggest William had no intention of being pulled into another emotionally charged confrontation across the Atlantic, and his silence spoke volumes. That silence may well mark the true point of no return. This confrontation was not just loud. It was final, a moment when both sides seemed to accept that there would be no middle ground, only distance and division. As the family fractured, the fallout spilled into the public square, where outrage simmered and sympathy scattered. Amid the noise, one provocative question began to echo louder than the rest. Was Meghan's title ever truly earned? She arrived like a whirlwind, graceful, bold, and full of promise, but critics now argue that the role of Duchess never truly fit Meghan Markle. Was she too modern, too independent, too outspoken for a position forged in centuries of silence? As royal watchers revisit her journey, the debate reignites. Did the crown elevate her, or did she challenge the crown until it finally snapped? When Meghan Markle first stepped into the royal spotlight, it felt as though the monarchy was opening a new chapter. Her presence was electric. A self-made actress, American, divorced, and outspoken, she embodied everything the crown had historically resisted. Yet she was welcomed with ceremony, embraced with optimism, and presented as living proof that the royal family could evolve. In those early months, she was seen as a fresh breeze sweeping through an ancient institution, an emblem of possibility before the promise began to fracture under the weight of tradition and expectation. She arrived like a fresh wind blowing through corridors long stiffened by tradition, and for a time, the British public seemed utterly enchanted. Crowds gathered in record numbers, fashion columns erupted, and Meghan was no longer just a duchess, she was a phenomenon. Alongside Prince Harry, and paired with William and Catherine as the so-called Fab Four, she symbolized the promise of a modern monarchy. But fairy tales fade quickly, and this one unraveled almost as fast as it began. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered as Meghan clashed with protocol, sometimes subtly and sometimes openly. Her insistence on autonomy, her unconventional approach to staff and media, and her refusal to be molded into a quiet, ceremonial figure unsettled the rigid machinery of the firm. She had not been raised within its walls, did not speak its coded language, and resisted the silence history demanded. What began as cracks soon became fractures, and the charm offensive dissolved into leaks, media battles, and internal breakdowns. Then came the interviews, Oprah, Netflix, memoirs, and monologues. Meghan was no longer speaking from inside the palace. She was speaking against it, loudly and relentlessly. Critics accused her of weaponizing the Duchess title, using royal branding to launch herself onto a global stage before turning on the institution that elevated her. To them, the title was leverage, not loyalty. Her defenders argued just as fiercely that she was never truly welcomed or protected, that the title came with chains rather than wings, and that she was fighting an unwinnable battle against an establishment that never intended to let her fully belong. As a result, the removal of her title has become more than a personal blow, it has become a national reckoning. To royalists, it represents closure and a long overdue reassertion of control. To reformists, it is proof that the crown still fears change and punishes dissent. Meghan's legacy now extends beyond love, royalty, or exile. It is about identity, rebellion, and the limits of transformation. With the title gone, Meghan faces a turning point unlike any before. Official records have erased her royal status, and she has vanished from public view, but not from public imagination. Insiders claim she is planning something significant, a memoir, a streaming project, or even an unexpected legal move. Her silence initially appeared to signal surrender, with no statements, appearances, or cryptic comments. Yet those close to her say the quiet is not submission but calculation. Behind the scenes, legal experts have reportedly been consulted, publicists instructed to wait, and media outlets are circling, sensing something seismic beneath the surface. A so-called corrective response is said to be drafted, strategic, precise, and designed not merely to acknowledge the loss of the title, but to challenge the authority behind it. If released, it could ignite another media firestorm, but Meghan appears to be choosing her moment carefully. At the same time, whispers of new partnerships are growing louder. Streaming platforms, publishers, and global brands are reportedly re-engaging, recognizing that while the title may be gone, the name still carries immense power. Meghan's rebrand is said to be underway, one built not on royalty, but on resistance. Most surprising of all are claims that she is considering a solo return to the UK without Harry, not as a Duchess, but as herself. Such a move would be a staggering act of defiance, walking back into the heart of the institution without a title, without protection, and without apology. It would send a clear message that she does not need the crown's permission to exist on the world stage, leaving the palace watching closely as the next chapter threatens to unfold. The palace, sources say, is reportedly unsettled not by Meghan's silence, but by the suspense it creates. The longer she waits, the more unpredictable her next move becomes, and unpredictability is the royal family's greatest fear. Every contingency plan feels premature, every strategy exposed. The firm thrives on tradition, yet Meghan no longer plays by their rules. This standoff has grown beyond the personal. It is psychological warfare, a battle over narrative, a test of endurance. Every passing day fuels speculation. Is she retreating to protect her peace, or is she preparing her most explosive move yet? One truth is clear: silence is no longer passive. In Meghan's world, it builds tension, and right now that tension reverberates through every corner of Buckingham Palace. They don't know what she'll do next, and that uncertainty terrifies them. Amid this uncertainty, one question lingers: why did David Beckham speak at all? He didn't need to, and yet he did. Why would a man known for brand management, diplomacy, and discretion unleash what felt like a royal grenade? Was it loyalty to King Charles, a strategic alignment with the monarchy's future, or something more personal, a quiet act of vengeance, or a message to the next generation about who truly protects the crown? Over decades, Beckham has carefully curated his place in British life. Once just a footballer, he has transformed into a global ambassador, icon of elegance, businessman, and increasingly something more, a statesman without office. His journey from athlete to institution has been deliberate, woven deeply with a long-standing thread of loyalty to the royal family. His relationship with Prince William was forged through charity but cemented through shared values, service, national identity, and protecting Britain's legacy. With King Charles, the bond became more nuanced, extending into philosophical conversations about culture, duty, and the monarchy's future in a fractured world. When Meghan and Harry began critiquing the institution on global platforms, Beckham reportedly took it personally. Their words were not just criticisms, they were fractures in something he considered sacred. Unlike palace insiders bound by protocol and silence, Beckham had both the freedom and, perhaps, the motive to speak. Whispers in London's political corners suggest he may have been courted for a formal ambassadorial role, seen as a trusted modern face capable of bridging tradition and global influence, a man admired by both monarchists and moderates. If true, then his statement about Meghan's title wasn't spontaneous. It was strategic, a public demonstration of loyalty and alignment. Others, however, read it differently, interpreting it as personal, a response rooted in Meghan's rumored fallout with Victoria Beckham over leaks and broken trust. Fiercely protective of his family's image, David may have viewed this as a chance to restore honor, not just to the monarchy, but to his own name. Beckham's motivations, in truth, were likely layered, a blend of loyalty, legacy, and leverage. Every word he speaks carries weight, every comment is calibrated. When he spoke, it was not gossip, it was a signal, a reminder that silence does not always equal weakness, and that defenders of the crown do not always wear medals or titles. Some wear tailored suits and command influence through calculated precision. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some hailed him as a patriot defending the institution, while others accused him of fueling division and taking sides in a family feud that should never have gone public. Regardless of opinion, one fact is undeniable. Beckham had entered the arena, and he wasn't just passing through. And just as the dust seemed to settle, a new revelation threatened to shake the palace all over again, a letter allegedly sent by Meghan directly to King Charles, reigniting tensions and raising fresh questions about what comes next. Weeks before David Beckham's public statement, Meghan reportedly sent a letter directly to King Charles. In it, she pleaded for understanding but included a veiled warning: if I am to be erased, then so must the truth be revealed. What truth she was referring to and who else, if anyone, was copied on the letter remains unknown. This was not a casual note from daughter-in-law to father-in-law. According to insiders, the letter carried the weight of someone who felt cornered, exposed, and betrayed, someone who believed the palace was not merely removing a title, but attempting to rewrite history. The tone, sources say, was emotional yet precise, controlled yet deeply personal. Meghan allegedly began with language that seemed tender, pleading for understanding: insisting she never sought a war with the crown, and emphasizing that she had endured far more than anyone realized. But then the warmth vanished, replaced by a cold warning. She reportedly referenced files, facts, and forgotten truths, words that reportedly sent a chill through palace staff when read behind closed doors. Observers noted that it didn't sound like grief, it sounded like leverage, a reminder that she had witnessed things inside the royal system she was never meant to see, heard things she was never meant to hear, and learned truths that were never intended to leave the firm's walls. The ambiguity of the letter was its power. The palace can defend itself against accusations it can name, but a threat it cannot define is far more dangerous. The letter reportedly left officials repeatedly asking the same question: what exactly does Meghan have? Some speculate it was never intended for public eyes, a final attempt at negotiation to stop her title from being removed. But the line "if I am to be erased, then so must the truth be revealed" changed everything. It was not merely a plea, it was a declaration that she would not disappear quietly. When the letter later leaked, paranoia within the palace erupted. Insiders suspect it did not surface by accident. Some believe it was deliberately timed to cause maximum disruption, not at the story's peak, but when the monarchy thought the storm had passed. The timing felt calculated, even cruel. Now, palace officials reportedly fear more than just a media backlash. They fear a second wave, one that could expose secrets, allegations, or claims capable of staining the crown in ways no ceremony could repair. If Meghan truly holds such files and facts, then stripping her title may not mark the end of her story, but rather the trigger. As the palace scrambles to contain what it cannot define, King Charles faces a nightmarish scenario. A woman he once welcomed into the family now stands at the edge of the monarchy's credibility, deciding whether to destroy it or bargain for her place in history. Meghan's next move, whether strategic silence or decisive action, could reshape the battle over the crown's narrative, and it is far from over.